Okay, before heading to the new stuff, well, actually, the really old stuff that's new to us, anything about the previous stuff or stuff to be that needs more stuff?
December 8th drop?
Hmm?
Or is that right?
It should be 7th, like, I guess I'll go and change it to the 8th, so, send me an email to remind me to change that. And since I already said 8th, I'll change the deadline in people's favor. Otherwise, that'd be neat. Anything else? Okay, so looking at the problem of permanence and change, and the question, of course, is if you have just like one thing, how does the one thing become the many things? And any story you have, even with like a couple things, you still have to raise the question about how that becomes other things. I mean, for example, in Taoism, you have the yin-yang symbol. How do they combine to make all the things? Now, in terms of how stuff works, another problem we'll see that goes through metaphysics, and then of course into physics and biology and chemistry, is why do things work the way they do? Because in the sciences, they talk about the laws of nature. There are all these laws in physics, like the gas law. There are laws in, I guess, laws in chemistry, like that gas law, laws in physics, etc. And one question is, how do things know how to do what they're supposed to do? So why does water always, like in gravity, why does it always run downhill? Why do, planets orbit around stars? Why do acorns grow into oak trees and not into squirrels? Now, the explanation that Thales gave was the claim that things are full of gods. Now, he seemed to have meant, not that they're like, gods and everything, but he seemed to have meant there's sort of like purpose or intentionality in things. And one of the, ongoing debates in the sciences of philosophy is over that question. There's what's called a teleological view. Put in a bumper sticker form, it's everything happens for a reason, a purposeful universe. The other bumper sticker is, of course, stuff happens, which is basically a random universe. And so, in the sciences of philosophy, people debate that. Is there something ordering things, or does just random stuff happen? And this, of course...
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You said, is there something order things? Wouldn't it be more logical? Because there's an order of things. And just when you say there's stuff ordering things, is different. I mean, there's an order of things, so certain things have to happen. And when that happens, it causes the action of other things to spring forth. But that's different from just somebody ordering it.
Right, because you can have order without, well, some people make the claim you can't have order without ordering. There must be something doing it. No design without a designer. And there are those who argue, yeah, you can have what seems to be design or order without a design or order.
Say that again.
One of the big debates in evolution, because people argue, well, the world seems designed, like, so there must be a designer. And the opposing view is that there can seem to be design without a designer. So you have the appearance of design. So the question would be, could you have order without an orderer? Could you have what seems to be design without a designer? And that's part of the debate. Teleologists would say you can't have design without a designer. And people who believe in just, say pure evolution would say you can have the appearance of design without a designer because you have this, DNA and random.
But even in evolution, there are finding states that the happenings of one thing is ordered by the happenings of another.
Yeah.
But again, itself says there's an order or a design.
Yeah, so the debate would be, could you have, that seeming order of things without something guiding it or directing it? And people who believe in pure evolution would say, no, there's natural selection, but it's not, natural selection's not something intentionally doing things.
But in natural selection, it's still, because you have the minerals of one organization, and the lack of here, it prohibits one thing and causes another. Am I not correct?
Yes, but again, the debate would be is there something like God beyond that, making that happen, or does it just happen?
But then still, if there's an order, he ordered it before now. That's why it's following through the pattern. If I have a pattern, I have to create a pattern first.
Yeah.
Therefore, when I get to that point, I know where to go next. And if there's an order, then somebody had to create the pattern for the product to come through that line, through that order. So one cannot have a order except there was an orderer.
Right, and that's exactly the debate. I mean, people who believe in design, or a designer, make that exact argument. No.
But I'm saying the people that does evolution, when their findings indicate the same thing, that one thing has to happen, something has to be there for this to occur, this occurs. So
yeah,
that's still an order of things.
Right, they would agree there is a sequence, a temporal order.
Which is order, it's just usually different.
Right, but they would say that that sequencing is unguided, because their claim is, roughly put, there's no one at the wheel directing things. It's just happening by chance with selection, and that's the core of the debate. I mean, roughly put, is there someone at the wheel steering the ship, or is the ship just kind of going, wherever, unguided? Yeah, I mean, that's why when people do believe in design, because it does seem, the arguments have always been, it seems impossible you could have all this complexity without a design. And the argument is no design without a design. And then the opponents say, yeah, you can do that without a design. And they try to prove that that's possible. And it goes back to the Greeks. Because some of them believe, you've got an order, some say, nope, ain't got none of that. So, what are the things that Thales also contributed? Well, as far as we know, because again we've lost so much to accidents and intentional destruction of knowledge, that he was probably the first person to embrace monism that we know about. And again, monism is a view there's one type of stuff. And as we'll see later, another view is, of course, there's dualism, two types of stuff. And he was a monist about water, so it's all water. Now, he was also the first materialist, which philosophically means he believed everything is matter. There's no ghosty stuff, spiritual stuff, etc. So everything is water. There's one thing, it's water, it's made of matter. And this, debate continues to this day, namely, how much stuff do we get? Is it material or not? Last two things for Thales. He believed in the value of theoretical understanding, which again is a debate still going on today. Is there value in knowing or understanding things, even if you can't use it to build bridges, kill people, or bake bread, etc.? Is just knowing worthwhile? Is there value just in knowledge? And Thales thought, yes, it is better to know than to be ignorant, even if you can't do anything with it. Now, of course, this is still in place today. So, for example, the push from our own Governor Scott, is to that is important. He was very critical, for example, of anthropology, which his daughter majored in, but she doesn't have a job, I think. And a push towards STEM, because STEM is practical. You can get jobs out of it. And people say, we don't need these anthropologists, we don't need historians, etc. And it goes back to that view, that there's no real value in knowing things unless you can, I guess, monetize it or do something with it. And so that debate continues. Is knowing something, you can't do anything with it, worthwhile?
What do you mean monetize it?
Literally make money out of it. So for example, you can monetize a new app that, tracks people's, health, for example. Or like when people, like Facebook. Facebook monetizes us. They turn our information and sell it to advertisers. Yeah, so monetize literally means turn into money.
So you saying people feel like there's no value in knowing things because you can't monetize it, but knowing things is how you make money.
Right, if you can make money, then it's worth knowing. But if it's just a theoretical understanding and you can't do anything practical with it, the view is that it's not worth knowing. So, like philosophy, at least the part you can't monetize wouldn't be worth knowing. Now, if you can make money out of it, then it would be worth knowing on that view.
Knowledge is building blocks.
Yeah.
And you may not know something today, but the section of knowledge that you do know, once you write that down so other people can learn that same knowledge, and maybe they know another key, they know the next step, because everybody don't have the same knowledge. So it's good knowing, like you said, so that such that if there come a time that somebody else find that second key, that second step, they can build on that. And once all the blocks have been laid, you have a bridge. So and this has been proven over the history of time. So again, I wonder how can any educated person say that it's not important to know something unless you can use it to make money out of at that present time.
Well, the argument is that it's a very practical view of value, that if you can't take the knowledge and eventually do something.
That eventually means unlimited space and time.
Right, because you could make the argument, yeah, eventually almost any knowledge you could eventually cash out somehow. Now, as a practical matter, it's usually when people say they want to defund, say, the arts, or defund, reduce philosophy, humanities, etc. And they'll argue that, just studying, doing art stuff or philosophy stuff doesn't do anything, doesn't create job fillers for the job creators. Yeah, so you could make the case that eventually anything you can understand or know eventually could make money or have some concrete practical value. But there's also the view that even if you never, if the universe ends and that knowledge never made money, never did anything besides being known, some would say yes, knowing it is better than not. Yeah, still good, better than not knowing.
No, I agree. Because money is not everything. It is a good thing, but it's not,
Root of all evil.
It's not everything. So if we didn't have the knowledge, the first surgery would never been done.
Right. Right.
So you build on these things to get to the next step, and that's why I have a problem with whoever came up with that thought, because there's the fundamentals, and then you go to the next step. But if you don't ever get the basics, you never go to the next step. So that's why I say I can't see it. I can't see how an intelligent man would even surmise the thought that, if you can't use it, why have it?
Yeah, I would agree because I went into philosophy. So, but there are people who do make that case that if we have limited resources, spending time on theoretical, stuff that will never amount to anything would be a waste.
Who's to say it would never be used?
Yeah, one standard reply is that, well, it's kind of like arguing for preserving the environment. People say, well, why not just like bulldoze down the rainforest and sell the trees and put in coffee plantations? And people argue, well, there may be like cures for cancer or other pharmaceuticals in there, and if we just destroy them, then we won't be able to get those. And you can make the same thing about theoretical understanding, that if we don't pursue stuff, then maybe in 100, 1,000, 10,000 years, maybe that would be pretty useful. So if you look at, this investigation into what makes up the universe, you might say, well, what can you do with that practically? But of course, now we use it in terms of things like material science and physics, and we have all kinds of practical stuff. Yeah, so one defense of theoretical understanding is someday it will pay off. Or, it's the sort of the hardcore view that it doesn't matter whether it pays off or not, knowing is better, yeah, knowing is better than not, no, knowledge is better than not knowledge, than ignorance. Another thing that Thales contributed was not appealing to tradition or authority. He doesn't say this is true because it has always been said, or that the authorities say so. Now, one thing that occurs in the sciences, philosophy, and politics is a cycle of authority and rebellion. If you take the case of philosophy, Aristotle became, as we'll see, he became the philosopher and was accepted authority throughout the Middle Ages. People would just refer to, that's why science kind of stagnated in the Middle Ages, because intellectuals deferred to the authority of Aristotle and the church, which is why in part it was, one of the reasons it was the Dark Ages, because there wasn't much innovation. It wasn't that nothing was being done, but mostly it was, this is true because authority says so, this is true because this is what this person said.
You said in the Dark Ages they referred to Aristotle and the church?
Yep, relied heavily on the authority of the church and the authority of Aristotle. So much so that he was known as...
Then authority of
Yep.
Aristotle. Okay.
And then what happened is eventually people got, in philosophy, got tired of that, and you had thinkers like Locke and Descartes who were discontented with just simply saying this is true because Aristotle said so or the church says so. And you have, you had the Renaissance, and the same thing happens in politics. People just kind of go into the authority and tradition, and then you have a revolution. And then people go into a new tradition and authority, and then revolution. Kind of interesting cycle. And you get the most interesting philosophy during times, of course, of, when people rebel against tradition and authority. They become exciting times, often dangerous times. Like the French Revolution, super dangerous. Now the next pre-Socratics include our good dead friend Anaximander, which sounds like a video game character. Of course, they all kind of do. 610 to 545. Now, he raised the question that's, again, it's still being raised in physics and metaphysics today. How can a particular thing, say water, be the basis for all the things? So if you have like a thing that's one thing, how does it become like all the other things? And this applies whether you're talking about, going back to like, okay, water. But if you talk about, one of the questions still persisting to this day is, what is the one thing that makes of everything? And if you have just one thing, how do you make that into everything else? How does it become all these, like all the diverse things? Now, his answer was this, and this is pointing towards what we consider, more modern views of the sciencey stuff. So instead of saying like, okay, it's like dirt or water or fire or something, he believed that ultimate reality must be eternal and imperishable, which later becomes developed in Plato, but also in the laws of thermodynamics, in which matter can neither be created nor destroyed. It merely changes form. Yeah, so we in a way kind of believe in an eternal, imperishable universe, except when we don't. Now, he came up with, which also sounds like something from a video game, sounds like something you'd be questing for, or something that's going to destroy the world, the aprion, the boundless, the infinite, the indefinite. Now, in many ways, it's similar to the Taoist concept of the Tao, which is because it has no boundaries, no divisions. Now, unlike the Tao, and this will sound in a way kind of like modern physics, it fills all of space. It is a dynamic mass. And one debate that's, of course, gone on since people start thinking about stuff is there such a thing as actual empty space? Could you have a space that has nothing? And of course, on one hand, you need empty space to be able to move. On the other hand, if it was empty, then there's no space, then there'd be nothing. So, problem. It's infinite in time, indefinite in quality, and of course, it doesn't have any qualities. Why? Well, if it had qualities of its own, it couldn't become other things, or so he claims. And you can't define it, although he kind of has tried to. So here, in a way, you can hear echoes of this today in talking about space-time, because you have like this space-time that is everything, and it makes up all the things. And somehow everything comes out of it. And so we see this, you know, the sort of the foundational theories that people are still stealing from today. Now, like our other dead guys, he had to deal with the problem of change. And he came up with these notions that still affect things to this day. And they end up actually in like movies and stories as well. Here's the idea. He believed in the warring of opposites. And of course we still have that, the notion of the elements, like the opposing elements. In the beginning, of course, everything was this apeiron, and somehow it produces other stuff. So his view is this one fundamental thing, the apeiron, and it becomes everything else. And somehow it contains within it all the opposites, thus producing all the stuff. Or so he claims. Now going back to what you raised about evolution, if you ever wonder like where did evolutionary theory come from, most people of course say, yeah, Charles Darwin. But it actually goes back to Anaxander, or X as no one called him. He developed probably the first known evolutionary theory. And it was an evolutionary theory because he had the view that there'd just be random combinations of things. He gave, for example, like a cow with like sticks, literal twig, sticks for legs. And he had natural selection built in saying, well, if you had a cow that just had sticks for legs, what would happen to poor stick cow? Yeah, he'd be eaten by the wolves. That'd be it for stick cow. Sorry, stick cow. Yeah, we'll always remember you as we eat you. Yeah, and so his view was that things that were like messed up, they just would die. And then you'd get things that were functional, like cows with proper legs, they would survive. And so the idea that there is evolution goes back to, way back, to this dead guy. Now he also believed, and this is, there's often the view that the ancients thought the earth was like flat, and the Greeks actually, most of the philosophers believed the earth was a sphere. It actually goes, the idea the earth is round goes way back. There's actually a philosopher calculated this by using shadows and angles of the sun, and walked around and measured stuff and figured out the earth. He actually estimated the size of the earth pretty closely. Just walk around with some sticks. Now, it can't be the idea that the earth rested on nothing, which is something we still believe today, in a way, that there's nothing holding the earth up. He also believed the universe was spherical, and we are the center. Now, on one hand, you might say that's been disproven, but actually it hasn't. Because if the universe is infinite, where's the center? Exactly, anywhere you want it to be. And I want it to be me. But it can be you too, because it's infinite. We can all be the center of the universe. Why not? Now, like sometimes we believe today, the universe is everlasting creation and destruction. So if it goes on forever, things arise, things fail. So in many ways, again, we see sort of a painting of a picture in broad strokes of ideas that persist till today. So it's pretty important, engaging in this abstract notion of what there is, presenting philosophical criticism, developing the notion of change, and also sort of interesting enough, developing a notion of justice based on the warring of opposites. And then, of course, he died, and is still dead today. So what are these Milesians? What are some of the things that they gave us before they died? Well, one of the main contributions was the development of philosophical methodology. And these persist to this day in philosophy and the sciences, namely empiricism and rationalism. And if you're a philosopher, you pretty much have to choose a side. It's like required. If you're doing sciencey stuff, you have to pick a side. And here's why. If you're an empiricist, you believe that all that we know about what exists comes from the senses. So if you know something exists, then it had to come to the senses in some manner. Now, you can use, if you're wondering, what about like, you know, radio telescopes or X-rays or MRIs? Yeah, that's fine, because even though we can't see X-rays, we can see the results of X-rays. But so it's still empirical science. So the only way you can know what exists is by empirical means. Now, the rationalists believe that you can know about at least some things existing by pure reason, by doing, if you want to be scientific, doing the equations. Or in the case of Descartes, we'll see just sitting and thinking about it. Now, both groups agree, so if you say, well, if I'm an empiricist, can I still use like math? And the answer is yeah. Because if you ask an empiricist, are there some things you can know that without empirical, you know, stuff going on? And their view would be, yeah. Well, I'll use a quick illustration. Okay, I've drawn a triangle on the board and hit it with my hand. How many sides does it have?
Right.
How did you know?
That's a triangle.
Yeah, because by definition, triangles have 3 sides. So if you ask the empiricist, how many, you know, do you know how many sides a triangle has without looking, they would say, yeah, because all triangles have 3 sides. And if you ask a rationalist, you know, do you know how many sides a triangle has without looking, they would say, yeah, also 3 sides. Now, also similarly, if the question is, did I erase the triangle or not? Well, you can't tell without what? Yeah, without looking. You can't know that by pure reason. So if you ask a rationalist, could you know there's a triangle there without looking, they'd say, well, probably not. Same with the empiricist. But where they differ is this. The empiricist says you can't prove the existence of anything just by thinking about it. It's got to begin with some sort of empirical observation. Now you may end up proving stuff, you know, from empirical observation. So for example, we've never directly observed electrons because we can't see them. So we have to go by an observation, and then we do some theory, and we say electrons. Similarly, like for, you know, things in, you know, astronomy, we don't observe some things directly, we observe them indirectly. But it goes back to empirical observation. So empiricists say, whatever you know exists, you got to be able to trace it back. It may be like a little blip on a, you know, instrument, but you got to be able to trace it back to something empirical. Rationalists claim there are at least some things that you can prove, and we'll talk about this later, a priori, by pure reason. Usually God, most commonly God. For example, we'll see this in the future, but one standard example is this, proving God's existence. If God wasn't perfect, if God didn't exist, he wouldn't be perfect, but God's perfect. So he's got to exist, because if he didn't exist, he wouldn't be perfect, but he is, so he does. So boom, prove God's existence by pure reason. And some people think that's a terrible cheat, just clever wordplay. Other people, though, think that it's gets it right.
Said in astronomy, what would you say about astronomy?
Oh, you can do with astronomy and also like particle physics. There's some things you can't observe directly because we can't see electrons with our eyes. We can't see gravity waves, etc., or black holes. But we can have observations indirectly, and then do some, you know, theory and equations and say, aha, that little blip on the screen means like electrons exist, or that result on the.
So you can observe more indirectly than.
Yeah, and the empiricists would say, yeah, you can, you know, you don't have to like see it literally with your eyes, but ultimately there must be empirical evidence, some type of observation, maybe involving instruments. The rationalists would say, at least for some things, you can prove by pure reason. You could sit down and do like equations, or just think about it and prove that stuff exists. And there are people in the sciences who think there's some things we can never observe, for example, alternative realities, because you can't get to them, but they believe the math says they've got to exist. So even though there's no observations that support it, at least in some cases, that you can still prove its existence. And so both the sciences and philosophy, that's a core debate. If you're going to prove something exists, do you have to ultimately go back to something empirical, or could you do it through pure reason? And most scientists scoff at rationalism. They say you got to go back to some sort of empirical observation. Now, of course, they still allow you to do all kinds of math and theory and stuff, but they would say ultimately you got to ground it in some type of observation, which I think is just a way that they try to justify getting budgets and stuff. So the Milesians kind of got this fight going between empiricists and rationalists, and it persists to this day. In metaphysics, they gave us some of this stuff. First, and this will haunt epistemology, theory of knowledge as well, which is the problem of appearance versus reality. Now, one view of reality is WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. This is all, what you see is real, what is real is what you see. But then along comes science and philosophy and ruins everything. For example, both science and philosophy tell us that color is not real. There is no blue. Blue is in your mind. Seems to be out there, but blue is in your mind. And if you're a musician, blues could be in your soul. Sorry, that was just too easy. Now the challenge then, of course, is if reality is one thing and appearance is another, how do we know what's actually real? This leads to the problems in epistemology that arise in the sciences as well. Because again, modern science tells us that what we're experiencing, most of it is built in our brain. We construct all this stuff, and what's really out there, and in Kant, we'll say we talk about Kant, the noumena, what is really real, and the phenomena, what we experience. Also, they gave us this monism. There's one type of stuff. They also gave us materialism, and of course the problem of change. And again, these are things, even though these are ancient problems, if you go into physics today, you'd still be doing the same stuff. We still haven't answered all the questions about what is real. Now, I was talking about the math stuff. So we're going to bring in our big math guy. And of course, one of the biggest math guys is Pythagoras and his cult. He had a cult, for real. True story. He was born in 570, died in 495, and is of course still dead today. Now normally you think about Pythagoras, when you think about Pythagoras, you think about what? Yeah, the famous theorem, which, although some critics say it wasn't actually him, it was somebody else. Which is quite a scandal in the ancient world. But still famous. Now, what many people don't know is sort of the inside story about Pythagoras. In addition to his, mathing stuff, the math basically for him was kind of like on the side. It was less important. He, in a way, had a church of mathematics, which seems kind of weird, but it's a math cult, and for real. Now, he believed in the following stuff. First of all, he believed in immortality of the soul, which is, again, something people still talk about today. Do we have souls? If we got one, is it mortal or immortal? And Pythagoras would say, yeah, you are a soul, it is immortal. He also believed in reincarnation, that your soul is immortal and you are reborn. Now, Pythagoras was a vegetarian. Why? Because he believed that humans could be reborn as animals.
Anything.
Yeah, not plants though. So the cow, like, it could be one of your ancestors' souls, could be in. So you could be killing your great, grandfather's, new cow body. He doesn't seem to have thought that it was like merit-based, or it's unclear, but it seems like people would just be reborn as stuff.
That was his main reason for being a vegetarian?
Yeah, because you could be killing your your relatives, your ancestors, because the souls just transmigrated, all over the place, except in plants. For some reason, he thought not plants. I guess because they don't seem to think. Well, they kind of do, so eating everything is terrible. That's just the way it is.
He was just a weak man.
Pythagoras? No, he's a smart, sharp guy, super sharp. Now, he also believed, and this is something many people who do like math today embrace, is this. And also Plato got the idea for him, that the universe has a mathematical unity and order, that the universe is math. Now, if you talk to people who do like equations, like physics, biology, computer science, they embrace this. I mean, I know people alive today who are Pythagoreans in this regard. They believe that reality is math.
It has a mathematical order, yeah.
And again, if you saw the movie, The Matrix, they have the famous, Matrix screen. That virtual reality is, coding. But for Pythagoras, reality also is mathematics. Now, he claimed, and this is something that mathematicians, if you have a math class, ask your math professor if they seem, willing to talk about theory, ask them if they believe that numbers are really real in the Pythagorean sense. Maybe you get some extra credit for knowing about Pythagoras. He believed the numbers are real. Not in the sense, and this is one of the things about the word real. He's not saying that, the obvious thing, like you can write out, numbers, so those are like real because they're written on the board. He believes numbers themselves are real things. That it's not just the little squiggles we draw on surfaces, that there is really 4 and 5, and they are components of reality. That in fact, math is the realest thing of all. I mean,
he's not talking about the concept, but,
no.
Like matter.
Yeah, it's a real thing. It's a real entity. Like if you were making a list of things that are real in the universe, the numbers would be real. And Plato had this view as well. Plato believed, that numbers are real. They're not here, but they're real entities. They're one of the realest entities.
And where will we find these numbers?
For Plato, as we'll see, you find them when you're dead. Because according to Plato, maybe you got the idea from Pythagoras, Plato also believed in immortality and reincarnation. But you get to pick how you reincarnate. It's kind of like character generation. You pick your next character. And Plato's view is that part of life is learning how to make better choices for your next life. Or so but in a way, it's kind of bad because your memory gets erased every time.
Now, which one I want to I put it. Knowing is,
Half the battle.
if it's not real, if you don't know it, it's like, it's opinion, it's a fact, opinion, or reality. They just double talk all along the way about.
That could be a lot of people.
Yeah, but this is, I think it was Plato. Having the knowledge of makes it either verified or unverified, real or opinion.
Oh yeah, because Plato's view was, there's objects of knowledge, objects of opinion, and then object of ignorance, which is, actually is nothing, because it'd be, ignorance corresponds to nothing, opinion corresponds to the imperfect world, and knowledge corresponds to the perfect world of forms.
Right.
Yeah, so Plato had those three, we'll see those three levels. Yeah, so Pythagoras, you get math. The numbers are really real. And again, it's weirder than it sounds, because he's not saying, like the, plastic, like for each numbers or numbers written on the board are real, that numbers themselves are real things. That 4 is real. And of course 7, 8, 9, so it's terrified of that. Sorry. Now, he claims you can't understand physical objects without understanding mathematics. And people who do engineering and physics would probably agree with that, because, mathematics and physics are all about the math. Now, also, which is kind of cool, Pythagoras is not only into math, but also into music. And not surprisingly, people who are good at music are often good at math, and often vice versa. And I am terrible at both. So at least I'm consistent. And good at logic, terrible at the math stuff, and the music stuff. In fact, I use singing when I want to terrify and punish people. It works kind of like a banshee type of deal, I suppose. I will sing unless I get donuts, has often succeeded. I'm gonna get donuts. So, how does it work? Well, he claims that music actually is proof of his view. Why? Well, because music is, of course, harmony and mathematics and so forth. And he believes, you probably heard the phrase, because the popular one, the notion of the music of the spheres or the harmony of the spheres. And that originates in Pythagoras. And his view is, as not only is the universe mathematical, there's also the music of reality. There's like a literal soundtrack of the world. So there's this, crudely put, reality is built out of mathematics, and all the things interacting produces this beautiful harmony, this celestial chorus. What is kind of a beautiful look at the universe, just this wonderful, magnificent entity, just of purest order, purest beauty, and purest harmony of beauty. Yeah, hell of a soundtrack, I suppose. Now, he also believed, by analogy, that he's also kind of a health nut. So, checking all the crazy boxes. So he also believed that just as you have a harmony of the universe, you also have a harmony of the body. And the way to be healthy is to have that harmony. And of course, he's right in a way. Modern medicine in a way kind of confirms this, that if your body is out of balance, yeah, then you become unhealthy.
But don't you think when people try to loosen the fabric of nature, they become screw loose?
Probably.
Because this is what to me, this is what these philosophers try to do. Dissect each entity in life to come up with something different or to explain something that's unexplainable, which makes them, if not, they do appear screw loose in the head.
Yeah, most philosophers go crazy eventually. Or early on. John Stuart Mill, as we'll see, he went crazy early on, got better. George Berkeley got crazy later on. Fairly common. A couple other famous philosophers. So I've got mine planned out. Plan out my descent into madness. It's going to be awesome. Watch for it. Nothing violent, just something cool. Usually philosophers don't go violent. They usually just go on to some kind of crazy idea thing.
But that's not a good thing.
Yeah, because we all die. You might as well die cool. If you're gonna die, you might as well die. You might as well die cool and leave behind a good story. They say like, live fast, die young, leave behind a good corpse. My view is, live a life, leave behind a good story. People are still talking about, let me tell you about this person and what they did. Now, also, much like the other guy we looked at, he believed in this eternal conflict, a dualism. Now, as you might imagine, this is an idea that pervades across cultures and still exists to this day. We have this idea of this, this conflict, this dualism, and you get some of the classics. Or you have fundamental is order versus disorder. So limit, unlimited, odd, even, want, many, right, left, and of course, sexism, always got to be in there, male, female, rest, motion, straight, crooked, like darkness, good and evil, square and oblong, etc. So we see in Pythagoras and earlier thinkers this notion of the opposites. And everyone's heard, it's always in movies and books, you can't have good without evil, you can't have the darkness without the light. And this traces back, at least to Pythagoras, this notion of, and also of course in Taoism, you have the yin and yang, so the notion is not limited just to the West. You find probably hardwired into either both. Pythagoras would say, if he was alive, he'd say, well, the reason why every culture's got this is because he's totally right. So everyone, anyone who saw the truth would see this. But it's interesting that it is a standard element in pretty much all human cultures, this idea of warring opposites. Republican, Democrat, cats, dogs, squirrels, Republicans. So why was Pythagoras important? Well, of course, he believed that metaphysics was very relevant to life. And then he ran a cult, for real. I mean, no BS. Ran a cult. So good work if you can get it. Also, of course, his view of ethics, although we're doing metaphysics, his view of individual ethical concerns, and of course, the idea of mathematics. And this idea of mathematics is obviously still around today. It's a big part of, everything, engineering, physics, and so forth. And Pythagoras is one of the big dogs of mathematics. And his notion of a cosmos. We still have cosmology today, and of course, science. So Pythagoras, pretty important guy, pretty important cult leader, and of course, still dead. But if he was right, one of us could be Pythagoras. Or maybe your hamburger. If you had hamburger for lunch, that could have been Pythagoras. Delicious, delicious Pythagoras. You can taste the mathematics. Now, our next dead guy, pretty cool. A fellow named Heraclitus. He had cool nicknames, almost like supervillain nicknames. He was known as like the obscure, the dark one, the Dark Knight. No, the Dark Knight one's Batman. He was born in 540, died 40, still dead today. Now, he was the guy that believed that everything is changing. There is no permanence. Famously, one of his quotable quotes is, "The world is fire." And he means this both metaphorically, that everything changes, but also literally, because he believed that reality is composed of fire. It's all fire.
Say it again.
He believed that the world is fire, both metaphorically and literally. So there is no permanence, according to Heraclitus, and literally everything is fire, as opposed to water. Yeah, they went through all the elements. Now, one of his favorite metaphors, and again, another thing, it's a quotable quote for him, is that you can never step into the same river twice. Because if you hop in the river, and hop out, and hop back in, the water's moved on. And of course, the water is dispersed, so if you try to jump in the same water, you can't. And his point was that everything changes. There is no permanence. Now, Plato, as we'll see, later takes this idea, because it sounds so cool, the world is fire, and he accepts it for this world. Now, he also had a system of social philosophy and ethics. So somewhat like our good dead friend Pythagoras, he also meddled in other stuff as well. Make sure I get his view right. Yeah, one thing about, page 13. Now, his view is that, and something that we'd see in modern politics today, is that this conflict of opposites is not only unavoidable, but he also regarded it as a good thing. So because of this, this will sound maybe true today, he believed anybody that wanted stability and peace, which seems sensible, he labeled them as soft-headed. And if you were hard-headed, a realist, you would like change and strife. And the only way to have harmony and justice is by conflict. And so his view basically is that all this conflict and chaos is actually good. And he takes the view that everything, according to the divine logos, basically the way of the universe, everything is good and just, but people make the mistake of believing that some things are unjust. So again, literally the world is fire, not only in terms of, always changing, but basically everything should be should be burning.
Yeah, so explain that concept, the world is fire.
Oh, so
Fire, like you just said, it should be burning.
it is burning. The world is literally burning right now. So metaphorically speaking, his view is that it's constant conflict and change, so nothing stays the same. Nothing, nothing is the same.
What that got to do with fire?
Because fire constantly moves, it constantly changes. Fire is, never still. Now, he also believes that literally the world is composed of fire. Like, Thales believed it's made out of water and everything, that water changes form to become all the other stuff. Heraclitus believed that fire undergoes, a similar transformation and becomes stuff. So everything is fire. Both metaphorically speaking, like everything's constantly changing, and literally metaphysically. Now, obviously, he was wrong, but interesting view. And again, his view of social and political philosophy is basically the idea that still persists to this day, that you need to have conflict, and conflict is good. War is, and chaos is good. Have you ever saw the sci-fi series Babylon 5?
Mm-hmm.
There was the race that lived on Zahadum. They had basically Heraclitus philosophy. They believed the only way anything improved was by chaos, war, and destruction. So their goal was to plunge everything, the universe, into war, but they were doing that for everybody's own good. And they have one of the characters argues essentially Heraclitus's view. It is only through this chaos and fire that anything good arises. So influences sci-fi.
See what I say to you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it does become a view that you do see in politics. That capitalism. What's a fundamental tenet of capitalism? Everybody competes, and then it's supposed to be great. So out of the conflict and chaos of capitalism, you're supposed to get this great system. So in a way, Heraclitus, you could say, laid the theoretical foundation for competitive capitalism, which you may think of as having its. Okay, so.